Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today I have a special guest joining me, Richard Lang. He is the author of a new book called First Responders Guide to UFO Encounters. It might be the first of its kind. Here it is right here, as you can see. And I just have been reading it over the past couple of days. It's very interesting. And Richard, who has been researching UFOs for 30 years, and he felt like this was necessary. And I think it is necessary. I mean, because sometimes what happens, a fire department, a police department might have to respond to a situation that involves something phenomenal like crashed UFO and alien beings and people who might have just encountered alien beings, and they need to be aware that this is a real thing. Is that right, Richard?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So, this is a fascinating book, and I found that, one of the things that I really appreciate about it, it's presented in a matter of fact fashion where I think that people who would not even think about this before would be able to pick this up and get a pretty quick understanding of this reality and have an idea of what to do and what not to do in the event that they came across something like this.
Exactly.
So
And I can tell you a little bit about what prompted me to write this book. Is I live in an area, a county that's very rural, and I know the sheriffs in both the adjoining counties because I served with them in the post 9/11 period. I was talking to one of the guys, and he had said, "What are you doing now, Richard?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of retired, but I write books." And like, "What about UFOs?" And he's like, "Oh man, I've watched all these shows and I'm very interested in that." And he said something landed up here in the forest one night and we didn't know what to do about it, And when I got home, I started thinking about that. Well, I know what to do about it. And so that started getting the ball rolling to write this book.
yeah, and there are things that, like, in the event that, like, for instance, the Lonnie Zamora case from 1964. I mean, that was, there was a response. There was a police officer that actually experienced something, and then other police officers show up, other law enforcement. They take pictures. If something were to happen? Like, say there's a landed craft and it gets reported by some resident or a citizen, and it looked like it might be a crash. What would a fire department that's responding or a police department that's responding, what could they expect?
Okay, that's a good point. So essentially, what happens is that as I indicated in my book, this has been going on since World War II, as far as recovery of crashed wreckage, and it started out in Fort Belvoir in the 1940s, and now they've got several facilities around the country where these teams of people, they're on standby, ready alert. If something happens, they're going to go take care of it. And when you say what happens, these guys, the reconnaissance units, it's not all about UFOs, but like, for example, if a satellite crashes or a military aircraft comes down, particularly if there's nuclear armaments on it, something like that, these guys, that's the go team. They're going to go take care of it real fast. Now, as far as UFOs go, what we've learned over the last few years is that the CIA has a division that tracks all this stuff. And, it's pretty well known that they're the gatekeepers for any kind of recovery operations. And the technology that's out there, if something comes down, they're going to know about it very quickly. They say that NORAD monitors the airspace above the United States and Canada. And, they can find something the size of a bolt in space. So if something comes into the atmosphere, or if something materializes in the atmosphere, they know about it very quickly. And you'll see that often because so many of these UFO reports over the years, you'll have a saucer craft and it's buzzing along and there's a helicopter or a fighter jet following it. So there's nothing new about any of that. So as far as a local law enforcement or emergency responder is concerned, there's really one of two things that are going to happen here. One of them would be if something crashes and the recovery teams are on the way. And so in my book, I even took some pictures of some of the equipment, the trucks and stuff like that. You know, they've got these trucks and they've got police lights on them. They're typically military uniform people. Some of them are contractors, and they respond to these incidents very quickly. So as far as the police and emergency responders go, they're probably going to get there quick, probably before you do. And then what they're going to do is they're going to work out something with the local police and the fire departments to maintain a perimeter around that area. So the police would often be involved in that as far as maintaining a perimeter, but they may not really be up to speed on what's actually going on inside that perimeter. So what the teams will do is they'll respond, they'll set the perimeter up, they'll put lights up and set test equipment up and figure out exactly what it is. And they'll do their tests and analyze it. And then once they complete that process, and it depends on if there's entities involved, if they're deceased or if they're living, they typically will have someone that can communicate with them. So once they resolve all those issues and get everything ready, they're going to pack it up usually on tractor trailer trucks and get the wreckage out of there. And they're going to clean the area up when they're done. And then once that happens, then the police will, once the area is sanitized, and there could also be contaminants there too, then they're going to open the perimeter up. So as far as a law enforcement person goes, you might not actually be in there watching them load a flying saucer on a tractor trailer truck, but you know something's going on in there. And they'll usually have some kind of a cover story for the public, you know, like there was a plane crash that had toxic substances or something like that, to make sure that people know that they're not going to be allowed to go in there. And whatever the excuse is, or whatever the story, the cover story is, the people in law enforcement, it'll be significant enough that they know that they'll use force to stop somebody from going in that area if they have to. So that's one way that it would occur. So part of my book is there's a chapter in recovery operations, because I really wanted people in law enforcement to understand how this all goes down. And then the other option would be is it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're on patrol, and a call comes into the dispatch office and somebody's like, something crashed in my field out here. So Zoom, you're going to go out there. When you get there, there's a whole section in my book about what to do and not to do. Yeah. And basically that what we know, you know, I've been doing this for more than 30 years, and we've really interviewed hundreds of people and looked at thousands of cases. And so one of the things we know is that there are certain types of energy fields that are associated with these things. For example, if you have a craft that's hovering, they use what we call electrogravitic propulsion. And that energy at close proximity to the ground, that energy is very similar to microwave. In other words, if you walk under that, it would be like sticking your arm in a microwave oven. That's the kind of skin tissue damage it would do. Serious. And obviously a lot of medical problems that associated with that would evolve for that person. So there's also a radiological radiation hazard. If you have a craft that's on the ground and it's still powered up, there's a sheen around it sometimes, and it's like an ultraviolet radiation. And if you get close to it, it'd be like getting sunburned. And then sometimes there's also radiation in like the X-ray spectrum that's strong enough to cause radiation sickness. So these are the kind of things you want to deal with and stay away from. We have in the book, you know, we've listed a couple of pieces of equipment that it used to be a radiation detector was as big as a shoebox, you know, in the old civil defense days. Now it's about the size of a pack of cigarettes, and they're very accurate and they're very sensitive.
Looks like a credit card.
There's one that's a credit card. And then there's one that's, wait a minute. Here you go. Here. Let me see if I can get that up there. Yep. It's trying to focus.
Yeah.
Hang on. There you go. Yeah. These things, I mean, can you see it?
It's blurry sometimes, and then it comes into focus.
Yeah. These things cost like $80, and you can set them for different alarms for certain sensitivity. In the book, I've recommended what the settings should be. And so if you have one of these things, it's in your pocket. And if that alarm starts beeping, that means it's time for you to back up, get out of there. And also, that's probably the biggest thing I would say is they should probably start putting these things in police cars if they're going to be responding to this kind of stuff, because of the cost of it. And it's really efficient. It really works good. These are so sensitive that the radiation from your watch will set it off, you know.
And there was other interesting things that you talked about too, was actually you're like, don't have an aggressive mindset as if you're going into one of these situations. Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Essentially what you're dealing with, if you have entities that are alive, they can communicate with humans. Typically it's done telepathically, but I mean, the bottom line is they can tell what you're thinking. So if they're crashed, you've got to sort of take it from their perspective. We're buzzing along and all of a sudden, you know, we hit a power line or something, and now we're smashed up on the ground. And we're a long way from home. So you can imagine they're pretty upset. And so when you approach a scene like that, I think you want to have a mindset of compassion, be thinking, geez, I'm sorry this happened to you. You know, just in your mind thinking, I'm here to help. Is there any way I can help you? You know, that kind of mindset, I think, would go a long way in making things go smoothly. By the same token, you know, police carry weapons, gun. And I pretty much feel like if you have your gun in your duty belt and you leave it there, you're probably okay. But you don't want to be waving it around. You don't want to use it to threaten. And, you know, if somebody hops out of a car and goes, you know, I'm going to shoot the first thing that's moving, that's probably not going to end well for you.
So what could be the consequences of someone pointing a gun at one of these things? What could happen? Is there anything in the books?
It typically doesn't end well. I mean, there's accounts of people that had encounters with them and pulled a gun out and then burned a couple of his fingers off, you know. And it's the same token, don't point. There's a number. Can you hear? There's a little construction in the building. Can you hear that, or is it okay?
A little bit. It's all right.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's outside here.
We're talking about the reasons why not to point a gun at them.
Well, the gun, and then also there's been a number of cases where people have, you know, basically everything in my book is based on cases I've worked on, so I pretty much know what's going on. But basically, when people have pointed, like there's a case we worked on where a guy had one of those million candle power spotlights like hunters use for deer and stuff. And he pointed it at something that was hovering over his backyard, and it burned, and a real white hot beam of light came down and burned him pretty bad. He looked like he'd been laying out in the sun all day. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, there's been cases I've read about where people find a landed UFO and they go and touch them, and next thing you know, they're laid up. They have all kinds of issues.
Yeah, and so with that being said, you know, we would recommend not to point any flashlights at anything that's hovering if something's crashed. But if something's hovering, there's also the possibility that if something crashes, their own guys may come to get them. So you might have a second encounter with something that's on its way in to pick up the survivors or whatever, and you definitely don't want to get in the middle of that. You know, don't interfere with that in any way. You know?
Have there been cases like that you know of? Where, I mean, is there a specific case where
I can't talk about it, but I know of stuff that's happened like that. Yeah,
where they come back for them.
Yeah, it's a possibility. That's what we've been told, but you know, I don't have like a specific, you know, that I could tell you about. But
yeah, I've read certain things of different, you know, throughout the literature. There's different cases. There was something that happened in 1950, I believe. I think it was in Brazil or something. There was a case like that where something came back, and I think even more recently in the Vegas case. I mean, what happened there? I don't know. Did something come back and get those things out of there? I don't know. But I guess another interesting thing here was you talked about. Basically you lay this out. This book is laid out in a fashion where it's you know, it's like a matter of fact. Like you just say that there's a cover up, just know that it's real, and there's going to be these recon teams that show up. Now, in the event, say police departments or fire departments show up first, and there is no recon group yet there, and they're trying to secure the scene. They see the bodies. They see the crashed UFO. What are they to expect when that recon, when that group shows up and takes over?
That's
What's going
the
to
key
happen?
word, is they're going to take over.
Right.
And they're operating under federal authority. That I would think most police agencies are going to cooperate with them. As far as civilians go, they have the power to arrest and detain someone that messes with their security, or if someone tries to push into their secured area. You know, people would be treated basically under the Patriot Act. They'd be treated like a terrorist. You know, you'd be taken into custody. You might not have the chance to talk to a lawyer, let your family know, or anything.
I mean, they
So
would do that to the emergency responders too.
they do it to civilians for sure, but I don't think the police are going to be that confrontational with them. You know, if they say, "Look, you guys got to back up and do this and do that," they're going to do it.
Well, what if they see something though? What if they're there before the recon
Well,
shows up?
then yeah. And
Are they
there's
looking at a situation where they're sitting in a dark room for a few hours getting debriefed?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. Because that kind of stuff has happened. But the main thing is, I really think that for the most part, you know, again, if you're out there at night, you're on patrol, you show up on a scene somewhere, and you know somebody's got a ranch and there's some wreckage out in the middle of the pasture. You know, you're going to pull up, there's going to be some calls made, and the responders are going to show up pretty fast. You know, they might come in helicopters, or we'll drop some guys in helicopters or whatever. They're going to get there quick, and then they're going to take over, you know. And so, you know, that's pretty much how it's going to work.
So at this point, I mean, your book was just recently published. What's the response? Are there officials from fire departments, police departments? Have they been talking about this yet, or are they?
Well, I mean,
interested?
I wish, you know, but we just released that book maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, a month ago, and that's what we're in the stage now, is trying to promote it. You know, I've ordered a bunch of them. We're going to send them out to some police departments and that kind of stuff. And I've contacted some of these. I'm trying to do a couple of local sheriff's offices first, where I know the guys, and then see how that goes. Put together a little presentation. You know, here's my book, and here's some of the things that are, you know, that you want to look at in the book. You know, and that's kind of where we're at right now. Keith is Dr. Keith Taylor. And I have worked together a lot on this, and we're good friends. We talk a lot, but you know, the whole idea would be to get somebody like in the Homeland Security realm to start. What we think is going to happen is there's going to be a movement to start training people, you know, because the whole thing with this has been kept quiet for so long, but it's obviously coming out in the, you know, in the media, with the hearings in Congress and the whistleblowers and all that kind of stuff that's happening right now. So, you know, the more that comes out, the more, you know, if you're a local sheriff, like my guys here in these remote counties, that you're like, you know, I want my people to know what's going on with this. I don't want somebody to get blindsided and get hurt or something because they didn't know what to do. You know, it's just like any other training.
I think that's the biggest problem with the cover up, is that this phenomenon blindsides people a lot, and it's going to not only civilians, but it's going to blindside first responders, and that's why it's important for information like this to be provided to the police departments, fire departments, and whatnot.
Well, you know, in the whole thing with the cover up, in my book, I put a little history lesson in there, basically. And this starts back in the Truman administration. You know, they started to, I think that the consensus with a lot of people like me that's been involved in this for a long time, we believe that the threat of nuclear weapons is the big drawing card for the ETs. That's why they're here, because they're concerned about us blowing this planet up or destroying the planet. So, you know, we did all the atomic testing, and then the next thing you know, we blow up 2 cities we destroyed 2 cities in Japan. And there was the UFO activity was high then, and the combined with the we had this really strong anti-aircraft radar, you know, to prevent the Pearl Harbor type scenario again. And some of those early saucer craft would fly through that. When they'd fly through that radar, it would disable their propulsion system and cause them to crash. So you're dealing with Truman, and now they're starting to, you know, the first person when I was researching my books that I could find that said something about extraterrestrial spacecraft was MacArthur, and he was head of the Pacific Fleet and all that in World War II. And there was a note or a letter that he had written to someone, basically talking about he characterized it as an extraterrestrial spacecraft that wrecked, and they recovered the wreckage. So that's how long this has been going on, you know. And you know, Truman basically said, look, this stuff is the technology is hundreds of years ahead of us, and it would be really smart for us to study it, because it would definitely give us a technological advantage over the other, from a military perspective, of the other countries. And so essentially that's what they did. They commissioned a group, and for years, you know, it was kind of like, this didn't really happen, or did it happen? But it was the Majestic 12. And essentially what they did is there were 12 individuals that were put on a panel, if you will, and they pretty much had control of everything that was going on. And the Rockefellers were involved in that a little bit. But basically the group of 12, there was some high-ranking military officials, some high-ranking government officials, and half of them were members of the Commission on Foreign Relations, which really surprised me, but that's the way it was. And so they had control of this technology. So what they were doing is, there's a book that came out written by a guy named Philip Corso and Bill Burns. Philip Corso's dead. I know Bill Burns. And basically, he wrote this book. Corso was a high-ranking, he was a colonel, and he was in the military, Army security. He worked in the Eisenhower administration. And basically, this guy was given a job later on in his career where he was assigned to the Pentagon. And essentially what they did was they gave him access to all this crash wreckage debris that they recovered. And so his job was to go out and make deals with private companies to do the research and back engineering on this stuff. And the book is really compelling. And if you read the book, and you don't believe one word in the book, all you have to do is look at the companies he listed and how they were just like ho-hum companies back in the early 60s. And then like overnight, they became multi-trillion-dollar global corporations. Boom. He talked about some of them. Like, for example, one of the things was the first fiber optic tubing came out of a craft and a crash wreckage, and it was given to Bell Laboratories, fiber optic tubing. And then the Kelvar was given to DuPont. That's the bulletproof material. And then the integrated circuitry, the miniature circuitry, if you will, was given to IBM, Texas Instruments, and half a dozen other companies that were into electronics technology. And so, you know, if you look at that air, you know, back when I was a kid, my grandparents had these radios, and inside them they had these huge tubes in there, and it's basically called carbon-based technology. It works on heat and stuff like that. And then, like overnight, we switched over to the transistor age. You know, the little tiny circuits, the microchip circuitry, if you will. And that happened, like, you know, if you look at that, the evolution of that technology, it happened over a couple of years, and it would have normally taken 50 years. So it's really clear that there was that technology was seeded with wreckage in technology. And I remember, no, this is going back a few years ago, but I think he was CEO for IBM. He was in England, and he was doing he was retiring, and he did some kind of a video on TV. And he blatantly came out and said that the microchip circuitry came from microchip that were found in wreckage of extraterrestrial spacecraft, and that's how we developed that technology. So I mean, that's the way it is. So see, the thing is just fast forward now. You're Truman, and now you're in our realm. And so what you have is that these defense contractors are literally making billions of dollars on this technology they've developed. And if you look at it, the the all the trouble that we're having right now with Congress, and they're fighting over the information which is being withheld from them, it's starting to boil off over on the stove right now. You know, people will say, why does the government just tell us what they have? And the problem is the government doesn't have it anymore. They've got it. They've worked deals out with all these private corporations, and essentially, I mean, people think there's a bunch of wreckage sitting around in one of these Air Force bases hangars somewhere, and that's not true. It's all in the hands of private contractors, and part of the reason for that is the accountability, because you can't run a Freedom of Information Act request against a private corporation, and what they do with that stuff is proprietary legally. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that makes it puts a whole bunch of layers between what's going on and what the public knows. And that's was done by design. And so that's what you're dealing with right now. And then I think that, you know, when we were talking before we start rolling about the you know, people in the UFO world knew what fake news was a long time ago. You know, and because there were so many things that would happen, the press would just cover it up or not talk about it. And the CIA has blatantly bragged that they have connections with most all the media companies and all the universities, and they control what comes out to the public. And I'm very sure that's true. So they've been suppressing this information for a long time. And then what I think what's and we can talk about some of the organizations in a minute too, but what's going on is. And I don't know if you've done a show on this or not, but the pressure in Congress is getting really high right now. And every year, the National Defense Authorization Act is a bill that goes through Congress every year. And it basically,
I've talked about this. Yes,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
National
So,
Defense Authorization Act. They've been trying to get. They screwed it up last year. They got a watered down version of what they wanted.
Yeah.
The UAP.
Well, the first year, what they did is they put language in there that said anyone that works for the government or is a contractor for the United States that has had direct hands-on connections with non-human biologicals or craft of extraterrestrial origin that's been back engineered, they essentially gave them amnesty and immunity from prosecution and said, if you come forward and testify to Congress, you're protected and you can't be arrested for telling Congress what's going on. And it specifically says in the act that they're exempt from their national security agreement that they signed as long as they're testifying to Congress. So when that was signed into law a year and a half ago, you have these people like Gresh and others that are coming forward now, and they're telling you what's going on, and they're being real blatant about it. And you know, there's been a number of hearings in Congress that some of them were televised. That then the Inspector General for the Department of Defense investigated people's claims like Gresh and has pretty much come forward and said, yeah, what he's saying is true. He's telling the truth. And then I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the Inspector General did a private classified briefing for about 25 members of Congress. And, you know, they pretty much laid the whole story out for him. Of course, they can't talk about what was the classified stuff, but I remember the one woman came out and she's just like, I just got to go home. I just got to go home. You know, I'm overwhelmed. And her face was kind of green too. So, you know, I mean, some of these people are getting a serious wake up call. So when you start doing that with members of Congress, there's only a matter of time before the lid comes off. You know what I'm saying? It's already coming off.
Yeah,
but I think that's that's part of why all this is, you know, with the book and everything else is now people are like, okay, we better start paying attention to this. We better start dealing with it.
I think like you're in the same kind of mindset as I am. I mean, it's obvious there's something here. I mean, with all the evidence that we have at this point, there's no question about it. There's something here. And it's just, we know that they're lying in the government. I mean, I guess the question I have for you though, do you think that the cover up was necessary early on in 47 when they started realizing what was going on? And when do you think they needed to finally tell the public what? I think that they waited too long. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that initially that was probably the right thing to do. But what's happened is And remind me to talk about the consequences of all this, the disclosure. But what happens, see, is these companies all start making all this money on this stuff. And then when Eisenhower's in office, and he's basically telling them that, you know, he wants to know what's going on. Like he had specifically said, he had sent a message to like the, you know, Area 51 Groom Lake S4 area and told him he wanted to know what was going on. And they pretty much came back to him and told him that he didn't have a high enough security clearance. And there's, you know, there's a link to a video in my book where they've interviewed some of these old guys that were part of Blue Book. And the guy claims that Eisenhower sent him out to Area 51 and told him, if I don't have what I want on my desk by a week from next Friday, I'm going to come in there to Colorado, take over the 1st Cavalry, and I'm going to come in there and rip that place apart. Your choice. And obviously they came back and gave him what he wanted to know. But there was all that. See, that's where the thing started. The rub started, you know, it's basically these companies start going renegade. And now all of a sudden they're like not telling the government what's going on anymore. And, you know, when Eisenhower, he was pretty pissed about that. And when he left office, his famous speech about, you know, beware of the military industrial complex because of the misplaced power. That's what he said in the speech. And that's what he was thinking. That's what it was about, is these technology companies that had this UFO stuff and they weren't, you know, but I think by the time Eisenhower was out of office, they were probably thinking it's probably time to bring this up to the public's attention, you know, but it never happened. And part of it's because these guys, it's because these companies are so powerful and they're making so much money on this. They're not about to hand it over anytime unless they have to, you know. I mean, that's the way it is. Now, the consequences, because you said, well, when do you think disclosure is going to happen? Well, it's already starting to happen. And there's 2 ways you can do this. Is you can do it a little bit at a time to kind of get the public used to it. And also, if you do it over a longer period of time, kind of a controlled disclosure, all these guys in these corporations that have made all this money, and, you know, that gives them time to sell their stock and collect their patent rights and get the hell out of town before the public finds out what they've been doing for the last 25 years. The other, you know, and there's some truth to that. The other thing is what they call, Chris Mellon talked about a catastrophic disclosure. And that basically means that one day there's just so much mayhem and confusion, the lid comes off and it all comes out, boom. And I think that's where we're heading. But what are the consequences of that? And here's why a lot of people are peddling this a little bit slower, because the consequences are going to be, if you come out and just have a no holds barred disclosure about all of this stuff, you're going to see mayhem, unbelievable mayhem, sociological mayhem all around the world. In you know, like in government and all that, people are, you know, there's going to be a lot of trouble. But worse than that, it's going to crash all the financial markets real bad. And I'm someone that at one time, I was very involved in investment management and all that. I'm just telling you that's going to have a huge effect. And people are like, well, why would it wreck the markets? Well, here's why. A few years ago, actually a long time ago, I met with a guy that his name is Stephen Greer. He's a doctor, very famous. And he's done an amazing amount of work in trying to get disclosure facilitated and all that. This was back in like 1990, 99, I think. I had lunch with him. And I remember at the time I'm working in the trust department, you know, doing investment management work. And so he said, Richard, what if I came in here today and I brought a briefcase and put it up on this table, and I told you that inside this briefcase, there's a device that will generate enough electric power that it could power every house within a 500-mile radius of this table, and it will run for a couple of 100 years without any renewable energy required, and it won't put out any pollution. What do you think that would do to the economy? And I'm like, well, at that time, the economy was predominated by the petroleum industry, and that would put them right out of business. The energy sector is the one that will probably get hurt the worst, because there's this technology that they've developed from back engineering, the propulsion systems and all that kind of stuff. They have perfected what's called 0-point energy, and it's basically a device that'll just generate power without any kind of pollution or anything. And it essentially works by gathering the energy from the fabric of the space around it. Okay. So the petroleum industry, you know, they're not going to let, they have those devices. And if you really dig into it, Greer did a movie that was called The Lost Century, just came out. And that's basically what it's talking about, is like all these devices that have been patented and stuff. The energy companies have bought all the patents, and they lock them up so that the public can't use them until once they sell you all this oil, then they'll let you have it maybe. And I mean, that's the reality of it. So so you've got energy technology that's unbelievable technology. You've also got anti-gravity transportation. I mean, they've clearly perfected that 25 years ago. And even though, you know, being on the front line where we're looking at all these sighting reports day after day after day, there's a certain element of those sighting reports, some of them that are triangles, okay, and we're pretty sure that they're human engineered technology. They're not alien. They were built by humans and run by humans, you know. And I mean, even they have lights on them, you know, and like an aircraft has a green light and a red light on each wingtip. You know what I'm saying? Well, there's no right and left on a triangle. So all 3 points have a red light on it and then a white light in the middle, you know. Tell me that's not like basic aviation technology USA. So they've clearly developed that technology. These things can fly. They don't fly, but they hover and move the same way the extraterrestrial ones done. So you've developed energy technology, you've developed transportation innovations, and then there's also a whole bunch of medical innovations that have been developed as well. So when all that sort of gets dumped into mainstream life, it's going to wreck the markets. It's the markets are just going to go upside down. And you know, of course, that's, you know, everything in America runs on money. And that's basically why that's part of why it's being kept quiet.
Do you think that the government cares at all on how, you know, they're reverse engineering these things in secret? The control group, which is comprised of these.
Yeah, it's not the government; it's private
the contractors, weapons manufacturers. So they're controlling this narrative. And do you think they care at all on what happens to the regular Joe out there in the street with regard to these aliens? Are they even care? Do they study this at all? Do they care about alien abduction?
You really want me to say that, don't you? Yeah. You know, they don't give a damn about you or me or anything else. All they worry about is making money.
So they're not even, you don't even think that they even have ever researched alien abduction reports or anything like that? Do you think that?
Oh, wait a minute. No, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about this control group, the organization that has to be in place that's, you know, studying this or reverse engineering these things in the background. Are they concerned at all with what these beings are doing to the regular citizens out there?
Yeah, but see, there's different layers to this. I would say, as far as technology and back engineering, I'd say most of that's done in the hands of private corporations. As far as like assessing the impact that ETs have, it's clearly that there are government agencies involved in that, big time. And it happens on so many different levels. Like, take for an example, like these UFO organizations. It's interesting that, you know, the government had Project Blue Book, and they're out there, you know, following people around and, you know, investigating cases and doing all that stuff. And then all of a sudden in 1969, Blue Book shuts down. And at the same time, these other organizations like MUFON go active. And I've said all along that I believe that, and just to be clear, I don't have any official function in MUFON anymore. I'm a benefactor and a life member because I gave them money. But other than that, I have no function with them at all other than that. But I think that what they did is, when, you know, a lot of these organizations, particularly in MUFON, I think that they, you know, when I first started doing this stuff back in the day, we used to, investigative reports came in manila envelopes, and you filled all these forms out, and you took the pictures to the drugstore to get them developed, and you put the pictures and all your notes and your narrative and everything, and you sealed it up and sent it back in an envelope. That's how it's showing my age, I guess, but that's how it was done then. And then they came along with these computer databases. MUFON calls theirs CMS, but basically what it is, it's a database where when someone wants to report a UFO, you go online and it says report a UFO, you click it, and this form opens up. And so you put your name, address, and all this stuff on there, and it says what happened, what kind was it, and there's all different objects that you can pick out, and you put your narrative in there, and they're quite comprehensive. And over the years, they've developed them, and they are very good and very well done. The problem is I believe that some of these agencies, probably CIA, was fundamental involved in developing those databases, and I think they have back doors that they can look at stuff. I'm pretty sure that's so, and I'm not sure that's a terrible thing, because for example, with MUFON, there's like 600 or 800 people doing investigations, and the system is awesome, and they use it and all that. And if somebody behind the scenes is looking at data or something like that, does it really matter that much to you? That's why I never really, I always knew that, but I never really worried about it that much. You see.
I want to go back. You were a chief investigator for MUFON in Virginia and North Carolina, as well as you also were part of the OSSA, or actually you were part of the Bigalow Group that was the contractor for us, funded by OSSA. Could you explain that?
Sure.
Explain MUFON and how, and then later on.
Okay, here's how it started. I was, my bachelor's degree is in aeronautics, and I'm a commercial instrument multi-engine pilot. Had a flight instructor rating for a while. So I've been involved in this for a long time, since I was young. And I went and joined MUFON years ago, and back then they had a program that would teach people how, it was like a certification program for investigators, which I went through and got certified. And at the same time, I went through the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services and got registered as went through all the classes to be a private investigator. And I actually worked for a private investigator firm in Charlottesville part-time, just so I could learn how it was done. I mean, in the meantime, I'm working in a bank, making a nice salary, got a lot of vacation, all that kind of stuff. So I started investigating cases. And I don't know, I look back on it, it is a little weird that I started falling into these cases that were about abductions. And back, then.
What year are we talking about now here?
I would say in the 90s.
Okay.
And, so I've interviewed a bunch of people that were abducted. I'd say I've bragged and said I probably interviewed 50 of them, where I've gotten to know them, and, the ones that were legitimate, weed out all the, the scammers and stuff like that. But basically I started doing a lot of abduction work. And you got to understand, I'm a guy, I come out of college, I got a degree in physics, I'm a pilot, and so I'm sitting there, I vividly remember sitting in this lady's living room. I'm not going to say who it was, but she's pretty well known. And she's telling me what happened to her. And I'm just thinking, man, I got to get the hell out of here. This lady's nuts. I really did. I'm like, I got to go, and then, so I go interview another one, and they start telling me the same kind of stuff. I'm like, and after interviewing about 10 of them, I vividly remember driving home one night, real late at night, from an interview I did with one of them in Virginia. And I'm thinking, you know what? These guys are telling the truth. And if they're telling the truth, that means half the stuff I learned in physics in college isn't what we thought it was. And that's what I call a change in your perception of reality, because that's what has to happen if you really want to get good at this. So anyway, I'm doing that kind of work. And then I was the state director for North Carolina, and I was the chief investigator for North Carolina and for Virginia. And then when the MUFON STAR team started, there was only 4, maybe 5 of us, 6 of us. And I was one of the original members of the MUFON STAR team. And then
And that was associated. That was in cooperation with the Bigalow.
No, not
Oh,
yet. No.
okay.
This MUFON Star team was like a group of elite investigators. The cream of the crop would be the ones that would investigate cases. And I ended up I ran that. I managed it. So with that all said, then when the Bigalow Project started to come into focus, essentially what happened is the Defense Intelligence Agency, behind the scenes, with the help of Harry Reid and Robert Bigalow, some serious money was gathered up to do a study. And the way that ended up happening, it was done through the OSEP program, and it was done through Bigalow Aerospace out in Las Vegas. And they had that acronym BASS, BAASS, which was, Bigalow Aerospace, Applied Sciences. And so they set BASS up to be the recipient. It was a sister company to Bigalow Aerospace, and BASS was set up to be the one that would get the money from these projects to do it. And so the study was commissioned. I was on the part of a team that was kind of like the project team to put the whole thing together, how we decided to do it.
And this is 2009, around 2008. Okay.
Yeah. And so basically and it would help if I explain something. That whole thing had two components to it. There were two prongs to it. One of them was the classified side, which is what was going on at Bigalow Aerospace, on their side of the mirror, as I call it. And then on my side of the mirror was the non-classified stuff. And so essentially what we were doing is we put a team of people together. And the team, we at that time, MUFON had 600 or 800 investigators and certified investigators. And so we sent this thing out for people to apply to be part of this project. And we ended up putting about 50 people on the project. And they were basically, we cherry picked the best investigators in the system. I mean, we're getting guys that were had been chiefs of police, and one guy was an ATF investigator and FBI guy, stuff like that. So we had really sharp people. And so when the project started, basically there was a team of 12 people. A guy named Joe D'Eduardo ran that team. And what they do is they would have a round the clock. They would watch the CMS database and around the clock 24/7. There was somebody on duty all the time. And so they were looking at that CMS. And if a case came in, then what they do is they go and try to verify they just look at the case and see if there's anything that they could verify. And, we had a couple of those, different kinds of background check things. And because what happens, you got 800 cases. And there's some scammers that'll make stuff up. And so part of the job is to weed through all those people. And then what they do is they try to validate the contact information. Sometimes they even contact the guy to ask him or her and ask them, more questions to just clarify things. They didn't investigate cases, but they picked the ones that we were going to work on. And so the criteria that we used to sort through that, out of 800 cases, I'd probably get about 50 of them that were really good cases that were worth looking into in much more detail. And so then when they'd send me those cases, and then I would go through them, and I would assign people to go and investigate them. And so then the investigator would go out and work the case. And then, I'd be in touch with them, of course. And then, my role was chief investigator. So I sent them, I deploy them, and then they'd be out there working on the case, and we'd be in touch. And sometimes they'd say, well, go ask them this or get a picture of that or whatever. And then when they were done, they'd submit all that back to me, and I put it together in a very formal, refined format. And then my report would go to the BASS guys every Friday. And of course, now with the books that have come out, Lukowski and George Knapp and Colin Callagher, now we know that those guys in the Pentagon are reading my reports every Friday. I didn't know that at the time, but it's really flattering that they were kind and they acknowledged that in their book. So that's what would happen. So once I hand the case over to them, the case report, then on their side of the mirror, they could do whatever they want. They might go look at it. They might interview the guy. They might send, you know, a doctor to examine them, or all kinds of aspects of that they would dig into. And our deal with them was very clear that what they did was completely proprietary. So once I hand the case over to them, they don't have to tell me what they're doing with it or what's going on with it anymore. And that was our deal, you know. And a lot of people at MUFON didn't understand. They're like, well, why don't they tell us? You know, it's because our agreement says that they don't have to. They're paying us $57,000 a month for this information, so they don't have to do anything.
Wow.
So that's kind of how it worked.
It came to an end, though.
Yeah, and it was unfortunate. I wrote a blog about what happened, and you know, like 16,000 people read my blog, and it was basically it was, not to hash up a lot of dirty laundry, but basically the MUFON people, the board mismanaged the money, and it ended up getting shut off. And it was really sad that happened, because it was really a fantastic program.
Wow.
It could have run. It ran for about a little over a year, but it could have run for 5 years. The funding was there for 5 years.
You know, after reading your book here, it opens up when you're talking about what spurred your interest in this, and I wonder, you know, would you even be sitting here talking about this? Would you have written this book if it wasn't for that incident that happened in 1976?
Yeah. Well, I was flying up the coast one night by myself. I think I was working on my flight instructor rating, which means you're flying on the right side. But I was in the plane by myself. And what happens is when those airplanes have 2 communication radios and 2 voice, you know, two for voice communication and 2 for navigation. So there's 4 radios. And there's also what they call a transponder, which is a device that sends a signal to the radio operator so he knows which one of those blips is you. He'll tell you to squawk 2200, and then when you set that dial 2200, then on his radar blip, it'll show up as 2200, something like that. So what you're doing is you're flying up the coast and you're listening to the departure controller from where you were. And you're also got the other radio tuned to the approach controller to the next place you're going. And that's pretty much what you do. You just stay on top of that, listen to it. So I'm flying up there and I hear this voice come on, and the guy identifies as an Eastern Airlines flight. And he's talking to the air traffic controllers, and he says, we have traffic in our flight path. Okay. What that means is there's another craft in my way. So controller comes back and negative radar contact, you know. And so the pilot comes back a second time. I wrote about this in my book, but yeah, the pilot comes back again and says, we have traffic in our flight path. We have a visual on it. And the controller goes, negative radar contact. And you can see these guys are getting like agitated. The controller's like, negative, you know, I mean, something's going on. So finally the pilot goes, look, we've got traffic in our flight path. It's huge, unconventional. It's rotating and has multicolored lights all over it, and it's in our flight path. And then the next thing you hear is this business jet chimes in and goes, yeah, we're 9 miles west of Eastern. We have a visual on the same object. Traffic controller, negative radar contact. Okay. So then everything gets quiet. So I'm flying on up the coast. So I get to Jacksonville, what that time was a naval air station, and it was a civilian and military. So I call him because I want to land. I was going to get gas and, you know, go back to Daytona. So I'm flying along, and I call them to permission to land, and they're like, they wouldn't let me land. They said, maintain holding for departing military traffic. Okay. So I'm flying around in a circle, and I look down and I see these 2 fighter jets come screaming off the runway. And they went right out over the ocean, and you could hear them, you know, their afterburners were all lit up, and you could hear them booming through the sound barrier as soon as they got out over the ocean, you know, and they were going right to where those pilots said that thing was. So, you know, the thing I learned is there was 3 things I learned. One, there was an unconventional object that was seen by pilots in 2 different prospective jet aircraft, and the controllers denied that it was there, but they dispatched fighter jets to check it out. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's, you know, I rode back to Daytona that night and nothing else happened, but that kind of started, the journey started with me there. Is that?
That's very interesting. That did you throughout your lifetime? Have you ever experienced anything yourself? Have you ever seen anything?
I've seen, uh, yeah, and I try to keep my, one of the things that, um, one of the things that you try to do with investigators, I've had some investigators, um, some really good ones that are actually experiencers. And, I always said to them, if you want to do this, you got to keep your personal stuff out of it. I don't care what happened to you, but I want to know what happened to this guy. And I want to know exactly what happened to him, and not with your put any, you think it might have been because this happened to you stuff. I don't want it. We're not going there. And if you can get people that can do that, then you've got some really good investigators. People always ask me, well, I'm speaking, they'll go, well, have you ever seen anything, or or have you ever had any contact? And I say to them, that's like asking a police homicide investigator if he ever murdered anybody, because you don't have to murder somebody to know how to investigate murders. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so then usually when I say that, then they back off and quit grinding me about it. But I typically don't ever talk about, I'm not an experiencer, at least not that I know of, but and that's just the way it is. I've had some things, when I was flying, I talked about it. I'm not in the first book I wrote, some things that had happened to me that at the time I didn't realize what it was. Like one day I was in Florida and I was flying again by myself, and it was Florida's beautiful. The weather's perfect every day there, and so I'm flying around doing something, and I look over, and in the sky there, it looks like a window opened. And if you held a credit card out at arm's length, that's about how big it was. And it looked like it had fire burning inside it. And of course I was like, well, people go, did you fly up to it? And I'm like, no. It was pretty far away and high. But at the time we got back, and they told, the dispatcher said, oh, the Air Force dropped some flares, and that's the sun reflecting off the flares. Don't worry about it, blah, 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 And then of course, later on, when I worked on the Bigalow Project and some of the things that happened at the Skinwalker Ranch, I realized it was a portal that opened, an interdimensional portal, but I didn't know what it was at the time. You see what I'm saying? So, and that's kind of like part of the growth. And when you're doing all this stuff, that you grow and learn,
Yeah.
and I think, like when I talk with Keith, he always says that I have all this hands-on boots in the ground experience, which I do. I'm not much of a historian, so everything I write about is cases that I personally worked on. But I've crossed a lot of ground and heard a lot of stories, and after a while you get you got a kind of a pretty good gut feeling, if somebody starts saying something, you're like, yeah, that's probably true. I know that's happened a few times. And then sometimes it's like, nah, I think this guy's, he's making it up. So it goes with the territory, I guess.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, there's so many researchers that they never saw anything themselves, but they did enough research to understand that there's most certainly something going on with this.
Yeah, well, during in the Bigalow Project, I mean, basically what we were trying to do is we were trying to get highly qualified people like police officers, pilots, air traffic controllers, astronomers, people like that, as opposed to grandma who's 83 years old and walking the dog and saw a light in the sky. That's a UFO report. But you've got a flight crew at 35,000 feet in an airliner that has a close encounter with something that's twice as big as their airplane. That's a UFO report too. So which one do you want to talk to? And that was part of the dispatch team. That's what they were doing. They're weeding through all the, the lights in the sky type cases and zeroing in on the really good ones. And also on that project, the big part of that had to do with propulsion. So the parameters that we had set for our work, that they wanted cases like where it has some kind of an effect on the ground. That was a really good case for us. So if you have a craft that flies over a building and it blows out the HVAC system, or the burglar alarms start going off, or you know, I remember a case, a lady had a farm and it had those lights coming up the driveway, and the thing flies over, and all of a sudden all the lights come on, you know, as it goes over, and so it had an effect on the ground, and that kind of stuff was particularly interesting to us, and we didn't. You know, they weren't really into cattle mutilation or abductions or anything like that. They didn't care. I could investigate them and send somebody out to do it, but they weren't really interested in that data.
I wonder why. Well,
because that's what their goal was I mean, they're an aerospace company. They were trying to figure out how the propulsion works.
That's what they were concerned. But see, now that comes back to the point that I was making earlier. Was are they really? I mean, are these defense contractors who are keeping this secret or keeping the lid on this? Are they concerned about what this phenomenon might? What kind of effect it has on the regular people out there? And I guess, you know, and here in a different scenario, it's almost the same thing.
See, the thing, I think one of the things that we're dealing with is, first of all, I think abduction is probably a lot more common than we realize it is. And I think there's a lot of people that have had some kind of contact with ETs. Maybe it's through mediums, or maybe they've got, you know, some kind of telepathic type experiences. But I think ETs are probably involved with more people than we probably realize. And the consensus, at least as far as the consensus, is that most of it has to do with nuclear power, nuclear weapons. They're really concerned about that.
Yeah. Well, I want to say, Richard, I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Oh, it was fun.
And I want to tell everybody again, this is his latest book, First Responders Guide to UFO Encounters. And this is probably, like we were talking about, it's probably the first of its kind.
Yeah, you can find that book on Amazon. Just search.
I'll have links in it, and I'm going to have links in the description for this.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And then my website is Lang Publication.
Yes.
It's www.langpublication.com. If you go on our publishing site, you can find links to the books too.
There will be links for your site as well as for Amazon in the description for this podcast. And
super.
I want to say thank you very much for coming on the show today, Richard. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was fun. We'll do it again.
Okay. Sounds
All
good
right.
to me.
Stay in touch. Thanks.